Hey all, so back with another Spotlight with Context. This time we are talking about Joaquin Torres' Falcon. This Falcon took over Sam Wilson's mantle when Sam was Captain America, and is a literal bird-human hybrid with some vampire powers in there as well, so you'll see that represented. Getting right into the attributes, damage of 3.5. This character has enough damage to finish the fight. They definitely are not a nuke, but the idea here is that they have powerful utility that is aimed squarely at some dangerous mystics, and so that damage is going to be enough that you feel good about using that utility. Survivability of 3.5. This character has really easy uptime on inequity, and so is tankier because of that. It's useful seeing their health value as being about 50% higher than it otherwise is. Whenever you're considering inequity, you should be thinking that way. Because inequity at the cap of 6 debuffs and 36% weakness effectively means that your character has 56% more health, and that is true for Falcon as well. Additionally, he regenerates damage taken during specials, including red numbers, and so is just generally survivable against opponents where the main threat is specials. Ease of use 2.5. This is kind of wrapping together the execution difficulty, which I don't think is that bad, and the learning curve of figuring out what exactly you're supposed to execute, because there are some modes to juggle and some swapping in here. It's going to take a minute, but once you get it down, I don't think it's actually that difficult to play through. And so 2.5 will likely feel a bit low to you as you get rolling. Utility of 3.5. There are a few different very helpful things on this character. The single most important one is just really easy access to slow, and specifically slow that does not require a heavy knockdown trigger, right? A lot of characters with access to slow have it on contact, meaning it can be glanced or otherwise interrupted, or have it on a knockdown, which causes its own problems. Falcon applies slow when the opponent throws their special attack, which makes it significantly easier to hold on to. And then defender strength of 1.5, just bluntly, there's almost nothing here, right? If you get hit by a special 2 and you have a bunch of traumas on you, it's probably going to sting, but neither of the special attack animations are particularly threatening. This character was not built as a defender. So, strengths and weaknesses. We already talked about the slow a little bit, but Falcon also has really easy access to debilitate, which is nice because it boosts the slow, it boosts the parry stun, is generally powerful, but also directly answers Enchantress, right? We're not going to hide the ball on that. Falcon has pretty easy access to 2 debilitates. He can stack them quickly, and that means you can treat Enchantress like she just has 2 fewer spells at all times. It's pretty nice. Strong physical damage, like it says here, all of Falcon's damage is physical, specifically in the form of traumas, and he also has physical vulnerabilities. I've talked about this before, but it's worth remembering that physical vulnerabilities amplify trauma damage twice, because first they amplify the physical hit, and then try to calculate damage based on that damage dealt, which itself is physical, and then boost it a second time. So you're really going to feel the physical vulnerability on this character. And then lastly, like I said, Falcon has some serious tank abilities, which generally make him better against mystics in particular, or any character that's going to be throwing a lot of specials. Weaknesses, for the same reason that the physical vulnerability is helpful, physical resistance does slow JT down. Now, it is worth noting here that small amounts of physical resistance you don't really need to worry about because you can cancel it out with your physical vulnerability. But if you're facing somebody with like 50, 60, 80% physical resistance, you're probably going to have a bad time. Next up, pretty typically for a science champion, a lot of Falcon stuff is debuffs, specifically non-damaging debuffs, and so debuff control is a problem, right? Anything that messes with regeneration can definitely cause some problems with Falcon's regen during specials. And then unblockable, right? Falcon does regen during specials, but it's always net negative, right? It's there to mitigate red numbers, it's there to mitigate block damage, and it's very good at both. It's going to feel a lot worse if you're actually eating the special, so keep an eye out for that. Getting into the actual abilities, first up, covering that regen, Falcon instantly regenerates 40% of the damage taken during the opponent's special attacks. Note that this says damage taken, not hit damage taken, and so this will cover red numbers as long as it's during specials. And the potency of this regen scales 10% flat for every special attack the opponent uses, up to a max of 3, meaning that if your opponent has thrown 3 specials, this regen is giving you back 70% of the damage taken. And then you factor in the recovery mastery, so you multiply that 70% by 1.15. You're getting quite a bit of health back. Important note, Falcon cannot regenerate damage from critical hits. So whether struck by a special and crit, another reason that unblockable is a problem, or just blocking critical hits through block, that regen's not coming online, and that's going to be an issue. Falcon's talons allow him to place a debilitate debuff on the 4th light attack, lasts for 20 seconds, but then worth noting that debilitate will extend itself, and so you can get a 25% debilitate, turning these both into 25-second debilitates once you've applied them enough, and then these are paused during the opponent's special attacks on top of that. So, like I said, pretty easy access to 2 stacks of debilitate, and then you can probably hold on to them forever, plus it's going to make all of your other debuffs last that much longer. Falcon does not gain a precision buff when using the dexterity mastery. Instead, he pauses personal traumas on the opponent for 5 seconds, but then this goes on cooldown. So, 2 important things here. First off, this is not a dex replacement. Falcon is using the dexterity mastery, but is not gaining the precision buff. So don't expect this to work against Serpent, calling that kind of thing out immediately. Second, this pause having a cooldown, if that seems a little odd to you, it's because the pause lasts for 5 seconds, right? Sometimes in the past when we've done an effect like this, the pause has been maybe a little bit shorter, but then you have to worry about upkeeping it. The idea here is that you only go for it periodically, and otherwise don't worry about it too much. So, instincts. Falcon fights each fight with Redwing at his side in defensive instinct. He benefits from different effects while Redwing is in different instincts. He swaps these instincts when Falcon lands his second medium, or when the opponent finishes a special attack. So that's important to note. It means if you're looking for a particular piece of utility during the opponent's specials, you want to have them there when they throw their special. But then they are going to swap after their special. So if you want to keep them there, you're then going to have to find a spot for your second medium to put them back. But the good news is that swapping in between those 2 instincts like that is itself good for you. So that's a pretty simple pattern. You're watching for your opponent's specials, you're landing your own mediums. It's good to think ahead with this, but you don't have to think too many steps ahead. As I alluded to, when Redwing swaps instincts, Falcon inflicts a physical vulnerability debuff, reducing physical resistance by a fair chunk for 4 seconds. If you have both debilitates up, this lasts for 5 seconds instead, and this cannot be inflicted while it's already active, incentivizing you to keep moving back and forth between the 2 instincts. While you're in defensive instinct, you get a bulwark passive, increasing your block proficiency further. And then remember, you are also going to regen any damage you take, so this just makes you even tankier when you're able to block. And when the opponent activates a special attack, you inflict that slow we talked about for 16 seconds. If you have both debilitates up, this is 20 seconds. As a reminder, slow reduces the ability accuracy of unstoppable and evade effects, And even if the unstoppable is somehow protected from that ability accuracy, slow will still let you hit into the opponent as though they weren't unstoppable, like grit or halt. Aggressive instinct, while the opponent is suffering from a slow effect, so this is why you start defensive instinct so you can get that slow up and then worry about this. They are more aggressive, so you can more reliably intercept them, which is nice. You're also more likely to have them near you so that they're more likely to throw specials if you let them and stay open. Generally keeps the fight flowing against mystics, which matters quite a bit because everything you're doing is tempo based. So that aggression bias right there is very helpful to Falcon. And Falcon's attacks have a 45% chance to inflict a 5% trauma debuff for 15 seconds. You can stack up to 25 of these. So that's quite a few traumas. The 5% by itself is not a lot, but you get up to 25 of them, then you're looking at 125% of your damage dealt as a burst of physical damage. Plus, if you have the physical vulnerability up, it's going to be magnified further, right? So this takes a minute to build, but once you get enough traumas up, this feels really, really good. Additionally, while you're in aggressive instinct, all of your dash attacks are going to pause his slow debuff for 4 seconds. So you dash periodically, which is going to be safer because the opponent's going to be more aggressive and therefore you can get more openings with intercepts, and you can stretch that slow debuff a lot longer than the 20 seconds it probably started as. Velocity, which stacks up to 10, you gain 1 velocity charge whenever Falcon inflicts the opponent with a non-damaging debuff other than traumas. And you gain 1 charge when the opponent activates a special attack. So especially against Mystics, this is going to ramp on its own pretty quickly, but you're also going to ramp this every time you swap instincts and apply that physical vulnerability. Note that because the physical vulnerability doesn't reapply while active, you actually do need to pay a little bit of attention to intentionally letting it fall off sometimes, and then switching and reactivating it. But there are other non-damaging debuffs in this kit, and yes, you can use Resonate to boost this further. When at max velocity charges, Redwing reaches peak performance, but you have to activate a special attack to use that, right? This is very similar to Nimrod. If you haven't picked up on that just yet, activating a special attack allows you to combine the effects of both instincts for 20 seconds and remove all charges. While peak performance is active, reaching max velocity again, so gaining another 10 stacks, refreshes this effect and re-inflicts the physical vulnerability. So the main goal here, like I said, is somewhat similar to Nimrod, is that you want to pay attention to what each of your modes does, but your goal is also to swap back and forth between the modes enough that eventually you have both of them online and don't need to worry about which one you're in because you are just cashing out while having all of your utility online. For the special 1, the first hit inflicts a non-stacking special weakness debuff for 16 seconds while you're in defensive instinct. So special weakness, we've seen a more restricted version on Mr. Fantastic before. Basically, this does exactly what it sounds like it does. It's a 20% weakness, but it only reduces the opponent's attack during their specials. It does actually reduce their attack, and so it does affect red numbers to call that out. It's not the same as Cowardice. But that is going to make Falcon even tankier, right? Remember, we have a Bulwark, we have instant regen, now we also have weakness in the form of a debuff, so it's also contributing to inequity, just making you tankier and tankier. In Aggressive Instinct, the special 1 gives you a Fury passive for 20 seconds and 1 velocity charge. So you don't have to worry about the special 1 only ramping you in Defensive Instinct. You're going to get one either way, either from the debuff or from the Fury. But obviously that Fury is going to ramp you really nicely towards wanting to apply a bunch of your traumas. The Special 2 in Defensive Instinct pauses all non-damaging debuffs other than stun on the opponent during this attack and for 6 seconds after. And that's going to be really nice because that's going to pause all of your traumas, it's going to pause your slow, it's going to pause the special weakness. One thing to note is that it will pause your physical vulnerability, which may interrupt your ability to ramp from swapping modes, right? So you are going to want to pay attention to that. When you use the special 2, you should have other ways of making sure you're still ramping, or you should be using this after you've ramped, you're at 10 velocity, and so for a little bit you don't care as much about inflicting that physical vulnerability every time you can. And then if you are an aggressive instinct, each hit also inflicts a personal trauma debuff, ramping you further towards all of those red numbers. Special 3 gives you 5 velocity charges, so easy ramp right off the bat, and then also inflicts a much weaker, special weakness debuff for 20 seconds. And while this one is active, trauma debuffs also grant you velocity charges, so this ramps you and then keeps you ramped, right? This, if you're not running Resonate, is definitely going to be the easiest way to maintain Falcon's damage over the course of a longer fight, because you're going to throw the special 3, and then you're going to, if you're not already in peak performance, you're going to refresh it much more easily because all of your hits are going to inflict traumas, grant you velocity, and get you back to 10. The signature ability increases the potency of Falcon's Bulwark further, so you get even tankier. Also deals a burst of physical damage whenever the opponent's unstoppable or evade effects fail to trigger due to ability accuracy reduction. This only happens once every second, but depending on who you're fighting, when you've got that slow up, this can definitely add up. And it is physical damage, so it's boosted by the physical vulnerability. Speaking of, Falcon's physical vulnerability debuff from swapping instincts pauses during all special attacks, so you have more uptime on that damage boost. And after the start of each fight, Falcon inflicts a slow debuff for 12 seconds, which is removed if the normal slow activates. So that 12 seconds is scaling. This is one of the things that you want to put SIGs into Falcon for, but it means that you don't have to worry about pushing a slippery or unstoppable opponent to their first special for you to get the slow. You have it online right away, and then you're just chasing it again. So I haven't talked too much about the direct targeting, but this is obviously very helpful for Enchantress, right? Because if she starts with her spells that make her go unstoppable or evade as you are trying to deal with her spells, having the slow online right away is very, very nice. You combine that with not triggering Mystic Dispersion by not gaining that buff when you dex, and having the aggression bias built into the instincts to make intercepts easier, and this is a really solid Enchantress counter. Basically, the only thing that you don't solve is the miss, which is annoying, but you can play around that, right? It's significantly easier to play around the miss when you have 2 debilitates online and have to worry about fewer spells, and when so many of the ways that she interrupts you defusing her spells are handled by the slow. We move on to Synergies with the 2 versions of Sam Wilson. We have There Goes My Hero. For Joaquin, each velocity charge gained throughout the fight grants 1% attack rating and 50% block proficiency, so you get a long fight ramp as well, up to 50. For both versions of Sam Wilson, Recon Scan's cooldown comes down by 25%, giving you more of the fight where you want to be. Creatures of Flight with Sauron and Morbius. For Joaquin, dash attacks pause personal debilitates for 4 seconds, as well as that pause of his slow already in his kit. Note that this isn't restricted to aggressive instinct, this is just all dashes pause personal debilitates. Then Sauron, personal bursts of physical damage are 25% stronger. In certain circumstances, that can definitely add up. And then for Morbius, Psionic Glide's medium attack inflicts 2 additional bleed debuffs, allowing you to ramp that much faster. Squawkman with Patriot. Joaquin's signature ability burst gives him 1 velocity charge every 3 seconds. So even if you are inflicting as many debuffs as you possibly can, this gives you another way to ramp when you're hunting those target matchups. And then for Patriot, when a miss effect is prevented by Patriot's Vigilance, he deals 20% of his attack as a burst of physical damage. This has a cooldown of 1 second, but is also boosted by Patriot's physical vulnerabilities. Birdman with Vulture allows both of them to deal a burst of physical damage when they knock down the opponent. So just straight damage boost, and then we have a generic friend synergy. So I've already mentioned the Inequity Mastery, which I think you should usually be running. It's worth, of course, mentioning Despair, which I think you should always be running, because that also synergizes well with debuffs. And I did mention Resonate. That is another bonus here, because it just allows Falcon to ramp that much more quickly. Relics, honestly, there are a number of different ones here that are good. He has physical burst damage, so Hulk is great, but Hulk is great on half the science class, so take your pick. It is worth noting the Captain America relic fits quite well because it weaponizes block proficiency, and Falcon has a lot of block proficiency. He also does have the defensive guard tag, so everything in that relic that cares about that is going to come online for there too. But yeah, that's Falcon. It's a fun kit moving between the modes. Trauma is always fun, slow is always fun, and I do think this is a really comfortable answer to Enchantress and hits a number of other nasty mystics as well. Good solid character. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will see you next time. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and take care.